Our webinar today, entitled Key Aspects for Maximizing Synergies Through Effective Post-Merger Integration, will cover a variety of topics. And thank you all for joining. We've got quite a number of individuals from around the globe on the call, and I'll be your moderator. My name is Stefan Hoffmeyer. I'm a partner of Global PMI Partners out of the San Francisco Bay Area. To tell you briefly about who Global PMI Partners is, we are an international services organization comprised of 10 country-based firms. We provide pre- and post-merger integration services, M&A integration, for mid-size and large-scale acquisitions. Our services focus around training, advisory, and integration execution. On our call today, we've got quite a few experts that will participate both in the webinar presentation as well as in a panel discussion. Today on the call, we've got Scott Whitaker. He's founder of Whitaker & Company and our Global PMI Partners U.S. partner. Scott is author of Merger and Acquisitions Integration Handbook. He serves clients across industries and has 20 years experience in strategic planning and all aspects of M&A integration. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Stefan.
Next, we have Michiel Vanderheiden. He is a Global Finance and Operations Director at Moleki Healthcare. Michiel is involved in many M&A and integration projects and is responsible for valuations of potential M&A targets. Recently, he managed an integration of a Polish manufacturer and an acquisition in Germany. Welcome, Michiel.
Thank you for inviting me, and great to be here. Thanks.
Next, we have Christophe van Gampeleri. Christophe is founder of Integration International, and he is our Global PMI Partners Belgium partner. Christophe started Ernst & Young's transaction integration practice for the Benelux countries before founding Integrator International, and he has led multi-billion-dollar global deals for both integrations and carve-outs. Welcome, Christophe.
Hi, everybody.
Next is Thomas Kessler. Thomas is founder of Integration Success, our GPMIP German partner. Thomas has delivered more than 28 integration projects across Europe, North America, and Asia. He regularly trains European and Southeast Asian companies in M&A integration and is a guest speaker at Zurich University of Applied Science. Welcome, Thomas.
Welcome, and thank you to have me on the call. And yeah, great to be here to the audience.
Great. Also, we had Danny Davis also scheduled for the call, one of our Global PMI Partners, UK partner. However, he is at a client site with some security restrictions and unfortunately could not dial in today. If you'd like to get in touch with them in the UK area, feel free to send us a note via info@globalpmipartners.com. We'll forward that on. And as for myself, again, I'm a moderator here and will be guiding us through the presentation. I'm president of Model Minds, Inc., a global PMI partner, U.S. partner out of San Francisco. And my focus has been delivering business transformation across 31 clients focused on extended management and process improvement. I'm also deeply involved in U.S.-China cross-border business development. So thank you all for being here. I wish we could introduce everybody, but a bit large crowd for that. So we'll move on to the next slide. And I believe, Scott, you'll be able to take over here and give us a little introduction on post-merger integration.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. I'd like to spend a little time before we get into some of the details around maximizing synergies and controlling costs. Spend a little time on some of the foundational elements that you have to have in place to ensure a smooth integration. As most of us know, attainment of synergies is very dependent on establishing a solid project management approach for integration. You're trying to combine talent and technologies and all of the underlying processes that support them, and all of that enables your ability to go after revenue and cost synergies. And without a solid foundation for integration, it's much more difficult to do that. If we look at trying to break down integration activities into some macro buckets, it helps to think about it this way. And the visuals here, if you'll notice, there's a lot going on before execution, and that's the point. Pre-planning, is where integrations are won and lost, and there's a lot to do before you are ready for day one. Within the pre-planning bucket, you have everything around setting parameters for timing, strategy issues, integration objectives, securing outside resources if necessary to help you with key work streams. That is key to get started as early as possible, and we'll talk about kind of ideal timing sequences next. Integration due diligence, securing all your background data, whether you have a clean room environment or a SharePoint, to inform your integration planning is a critical element, making sure that information is disseminated to all of your functional leads and other key participants so they can use that to inform their own planning. And then obviously the integration office itself, establishing the integration management office. I know some folks call it different things, alignment management office, PMOs. It doesn't matter. You need a short-term project management office to run your integration project, and you need to get that stood up and operational in advance of day one, obviously. And then execution, this is post day one. These are all your major integration activities and work streams, all your communications commencing, and your march to end state. And then wrap up. If you're a company that is doing this often, you'll want to make sure that you optimize your processes going forward by doing some integration surveys and closing activities that enable you to incorporate feedback so you can constantly get better at this if you're one of those companies where growth is a core strategy and you're doing a lot of acquisition a couple a year and need to make it a core competency. So with all that going on, what could go wrong, right? You've got preparation, people, execution, and you'll see the in integration parlance, 1 + 1 in this deal will equal 3. When in fact, if you shortchange yourself in preparation and all the people issues and execution, you could wind up eroding value and getting nothing at all. And you won't have to look far if you search on Google or Bing on studies that show that deal value is eroded in most deals. Most deals fail to deliver targeted value, and most of it is due to poor integration planning and execution. So we're going to talk about some of the things to avoid that, and I want to emphasize that we all have a stake in ensuring great integration execution. And that means if you're involved in kind of pre-deal due diligence or purely transaction, you owe to yourself and your clients to make sure that they are prepared for integration, whether or not you're going to be around for that stage or not. So my goal here today is to impart some generally accepted best practices so you can ask some informed questions and find out if your charge is ready. And if not, raise some flags that they might want to be thinking about some more diligent planning. Okay, let's talk about preparation. Again, what could go wrong? And the idea here is to not paint a bleak picture of what you're doing, but to expose the realities of integration planning that you need to tackle head on if you're going to be successful in execution and preserve value and attain the synergies that you're after. So one of the biggest things that I see in the work that I do is just a lack of integration planning. There's a lot going on and a lot to do, and people tend to get started too late, which can be a problem, or wait to integrate others into the process that should be involved earlier. Overpayment for acquisitions only in that if there is such an aggressive valuation, it can make the the integration work and what you're doing chasing after something that might be so highly aggressive that you tend to shortchange the integration work because you're just chasing a number, and that can cause some poor habits and kind of shortchange your planning. Weak due diligence on people and operations, just not getting the information you need to do proper risk assessment and understand the full complexity of integration work streams. Overestimated synergies. You're all probably laughing. This never happens, right? But if you're not stress testing assumptions or timing parameters to see if they're truly realistic, right out of the gate, you're going to have variances that become such a focus of the effort, tends to suck the energy away from everything else. Lack of shared vision, strategic direction, people with varying thoughts on the new direction of the company or what's important and what are the priorities, and that can cause misalignment and affect your preparation. Not staffing or providing budget for the integration effort itself, and then no playbook or consistent approach. And especially for companies that are doing this often, if you feel like you're reinventing the wheel every time that you do it, that is something that you should be avoided. You should be getting better at this and make it a core competency if you're going to be in the business of acquiring or merging with other companies. Next, on the people side, obviously culture, probably one of the more written about subjects in M&A, but if you're not properly assessing what you're up against relative to culture, or underappreciate the differences that between two companies that are coming together, you certainly will negatively affect your ability to integrate on time, and you're going to be dealing with a lot of kind of fires because you just underestimated the level of effort required. Key talent loss, retention is always a big work stream in any integration pre-planning. Who do you want to make sure that you keep that has deep, systems or customer knowledge or relationships? You should be ahead of that so those people don't get poached by your competitors or get frustrated and leave, because good people usually have options. Lack of attention to people issues during implementation. More talking about kind of the rank and file and understanding that people are first and foremost interested in how this is going to affect them. And if you're avoiding that subject or dribbling out detail in terms of how the integration is going to unfold and what changes, what doesn't change, people are just going to freeze at the wheel, and it will undermine engagement and productivity. So you got to make that a priority. Competing priorities, just people are after different things and don't have a common shared vision of what is truly important. You have people kind of managing in their own lane, and down the road that becomes an issue. Lack of executive commitment. We just don't have the C-suite engaged or involved in the integration itself, and providing air cover and strongly supporting your efforts can be a problem as well. As we move to execution, one of the biggest flaws is just not having an integration management office, an IMO, or some kind of project management team, or it's poorly resourced, and people don't have the bandwidth to do the integration work, and they still have almost both feet in their old world, and the integration work suffers. Ineffective technology integration, IT systems, and other elements of IT integration is always a very dominant work stream and should be attended to properly. That can slow down a lot of things. So that needs a lot of attention in pre-planning. Slow pace. My recommendation is always to have a bias for urgency. If you see a work stream that can be done earlier, without disrupting business continuity or causing problems for others, you should always try to do things as soon as possible. You don't want your integration to kind of mire down and just have a very slow and pace. You'll lose people, and you really want to proceed rapidly. No end state planning, kind of the never-ending integration. There is no targeted date where the bulk of activities should be wrapped up, and so you don't have a goal to shoot for. And then scope creep, where the integration management office becomes the owner of a lot of things that are outside the boundaries of typical integration work. And all it does, it's not to say that those aren't important things to be done, but you're robbing resources from your ability to manage the bulk of the integration work. So you need to be careful there. So in terms of pre-planning, I wanted to go through what I've generally found to be some best practices, and I'll give Winston Churchill the credit for the quote here: "He who fails to plan is planning to fail," because as I mentioned earlier, integrations are won and lost in pre-planning. Every time that I have come in late or been asked to kind of work in a rescue operation where you're coming in sometimes even after day one, there's been some damage done at that point. So if you want to increase your chances for success, focus on the pre-planning phase more than anything. I recommend you allocate a minimum of 90 days for integration pre-planning prep. I've done it in less time, of course. 90 will give you, a good time to get the information you need, to secure resources, to get your IMO stood up. And you should manage the pre-planning regimen like at the execution phase. So you don't want to manage your 3 months of pre-planning kind of like you're on the practice range the whole time. Act like you're in the game, and you want to have your weekly rhythm going as far as meetings and deliverables, and you're almost on a pace that feels like execution, and that way you'll ensure that you're ready. Next, mobilize your IMO, your Integration Manage Office, 90 days prior to day one. So I'm sure some of you are thinking, really, get all my folks together 90 days before the big day? Yes. Some people might still have a toe in their old world, and they can start transitioning work so they can focus on integration work. But this is when you really want to define scope, roles, responsibilities for IMO leads, so they clearly know what their expectations are, and how they're going to get their work done, the collaboration tools that they'll be using, and get everything ramped up. You need to secure any resources and commitments in advance and clear the decks. And what I mean is, you've got to make sure that that the people that own the resource have adequately cleared the decks for that person, so they're not still hamstrung with a lot of work from their old job. They have to have bandwidth for integration work, and you need to probe and make sure that that's happening. Develop a strategy and process for getting information. Early on, one of the biggest headwinds that you'll face, obviously, is sometimes getting the information you need to inform pre-planning. You have to have a good strategy for data management, organizing and prioritizing the requests from your own side so you're not overwhelming the target, having good clean room strategy and protocols to get the information that you need so people aren't in there just hunting around for everything and everything. And just manage that so people can get what they need and get their plans together on a timely fashion. Next, don't minimize culture and change management challenges. People like to refer to this as kind of the soft areas of integration. It's hardly that. It can cause you a lot of problems if you're not paying attention to it and you don't factor it into your planning. Things that you need to do is confirm cultural differences as part of your operational due diligence. I have a lot of risk assessment surveys and stakeholder interviews that I like to do on the front end to parse out and kind of draw out what makes two companies different, and to start to zero in on the likely hotspots where you really have different ways of doing everything that is going to doing different things that is going to cause conflict and that you're going to have to address. Next, plan communications for all stakeholders to day one plus 90. A common mistake is to have a wonderful day one communication plan that kind of dribbles after that, and you're back into reactive mode. If for all stakeholder audiences you plan out to 90 days with, what is the message, how we're going to deliver it, who delivers it, when do we see a draft, all those details that all us freakish project management lovers usually put in our plans. If you get that out to day 90, it'll just be like your communication plan is rolling, and you'll have more bandwidth to address kind of hotspot issues that come up that, there is in any integration, there are things that come up that you didn't expect, but you'll have more bandwidth to deal with them if everything else is planned out. Last, make communication everyone's responsibilities. It shouldn't just be the IMO communication lead. You need functional leads to own communications within their own lanes and within their own areas, so people are hearing from them and that they have a stake in what's being said, and they're vested in the delivery of the message. So you include them, and make it part of their responsibility too. So last, I'd like one thing to remember, and this is probably one of the hardest things, as I was reflecting, preparing for this today, integrate with the end in mind. And so what does that mean? I'm not talking about end state, the end of the integration. I'm talking about getting in state for all critical areas of the business. And so, you need to spend a lot of time thinking about what is the desired experience for acquired employees on day one. All those things like branding, email addresses, business cards, intranet, the signage on the building, etc. Those are all things that make an impression, and when they're executed well, the message to people is, we are part of a new company. They care about everything right down to my business card and my email address, and that's all been taken care of. And it sends a very positive message when it's done well. And then obviously, what is the desired end state for customers? Everything from how the phones are answered for customer service, invoices, packaging. All that has to be thought of in advance, so customers are getting the right message from starting on day one, or whenever the day that you specify that will change. And then all external stakeholders. Remember, companies, are participants in their local communities and charities. How does that change? What is the desired experience for all those stakeholders where that company has been, an integral factor? How do you make sure that either there's continuity there, or it's clearly understood what the expectations are going forward? Same with suppliers, vendors, and contractors. And one other thing here is I always counsel is to embrace transformation opportunities. So it's easy to get into a trap with all the work to just think, I've got some things to integrate, and I just need to put them together, and I'm worried about optimizing it later. There will be a myriad of people, process, and system upgrade opportunities where you can kind of future-proof or build it stronger, because yours and theirs maybe neither is what you need going forward. Yeah, it's a little bit more work, but you really are kind of future-proofing, and you need to embrace those opportunities. And really, I've taken upon myself and the integration management office to, as you're working through integration work plans, kind of finding those and elevating them in terms of visibility to say, is this an area where we should apply a little bit more critical thinking and think about how we might want to build something a little stronger for the future. And just to summarize, so all these areas, just to recap, kind of for integration success, some focus areas, strategy, clarifying the strategy and business goals, so your integration plans are drafting off them, and you don't have incongruencies between integration objectives and the strategic plan or the business plan is important. Integration support, making sure you have C-level oversight, and that you have their ear and have enough time with them that you can leverage them for decision makings and to break ties and deal with escalations, because you'll always have those. Resource augmentation, you need to resource your IMO and critical functions properly, and you need to make sure that is done early. If you're catching up during the execution phase, you're making things a lot harder for yourself. Systems integration, do not underestimate IT workstream challenges and timing. You need to help your IT brothers out during integration. Typically, other functions will make assumptions on changes that they're making that involve some kind of IT work, and you need to be looking at that to make sure IT is aware of that, and there's some integration practices that you can do to do that. But I'm always on the lookout to make sure that plans that include things that IT needs to do or get integrated in the IT plan. There's always stuff that builds during an integration that affects IT. Communications, just make it a top priority, resource it properly, make it consistent, and make sure you're planning through day 90. Leverage the positives, reward people for good integration work. Engineer some quick wins if you can, and engineer them early, and put some highlights on them. Here's something that we're doing together now, and make sure that there's visibility on some of the integration work. And then for serial acquirers or people that are doing this often, create a playbook so you're constantly learning and optimizing your approach, and that you can get better at this. So thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Stefan.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate the rundown. And although we'd like to have time for more Q&A during the discussion, we will show you at the end of the presentation where to submit your questions. We'll most gladly get back to you regarding any questions you have regarding Scott's presentation. So to move forward with our panel discussion, what we've done is over the past 5 days, we've captured many questions from all of you, and we categorized those questions related to the integration activities that Scott has reviewed. And what we'll look to do today is go through a subset of those questions for each activity and have a dialogue. And again, at the end of the call, we'll give you an opportunity to submit further follow-up questions that we will handle directly with you. So to move forward on our first question related to pre-planning, the first question that came out is, can you detail how synergies are incorporated in the valuation model? And I guess first to start on that question, could we describe what a valuation model is? Christoph, I believe that's a great question for you to answer.
Well, a valuation model, a lot of people probably have heard of a discounted cash flow model. What is that? That is basically an Excel file that looks at your cash flows for the coming years, so looking out into the future. And then all these cash flows are added up together and taking into account the time value of money, it gives a valuation of the company. So say a company earns has a cash flow of 10 million per year. You look at that over 6-7 years, that gives you 70 million, but with a time value of money that perhaps will give you 40 million. So very simplistically speaking, that is a discounted cash flow model. And you can also look at it in another way. You can say, oh, well, this valuation of 50 million is the equivalent of 5, 6, 7 times my earnings before interest and tax and depreciation. So that's also another way of looking at things. And when you do financial due diligence, your auditor or your advisor who does the financial due diligence, he will come up with a valuation model. He will say, well, I looked at the business, I normalized some figures, you know, because some things in the past were not really representative of the business as a day-to-day operation. So taking some things out, adding some things, and then that comes out with a valuation. And basically that's where a lot of companies stop. But that's just the beginning. That's just a normalized valuation of a company as a standalone company. It doesn't take into account what your synergies are. So what you can then do, and what some of the leading companies do, is they have this model, and then they have a second model saying, okay, well, what if I achieve some synergies here within this target? So that gives you a second model, just within the target, achieving synergies. And then there's a third model. What if I now take the target and I put it into my company? What will the synergies be then? So it can be revenue synergies or cost synergies. And that can give a whole new different picture on the valuation of your company, which your seller may not always be aware of. And that gives you a lead whenever there's a bidding war. I don't know, Michiel, if you can unmute yourself, if this is something that sounds familiar.
Okay, thanks, Christoph. I can tell a bit from my experience within my company, Mölnlycke Healthcare. Just a little bit short about this company. Mölnlycke Healthcare is a Swedish-based company active in the medical device industry. We have external growth via M&A transactions as a key strategic goal. Therefore, we did some transactions in the past few years. It is clearly that we very early in the pre-deal process we try to identify those synergies, and of course later also during the due diligence. And indeed, we make a valuation including and excluding those synergies, so that it is very clear and transparent in the business case you are making or in the valuations, how those synergies should create value. And also we do that with dis-synergies, of course. But we take each synergy separately and we value them each. We value them each separately, so that it is very transparent in the model, in the financial model. How do you value those synergies? And that is then also a clear KPI for the future when you measure the success of the integration of the potential transaction. So synergies are summarizing a very important part of the pre-deal process, identifying them, value them, bring them into the discounted cash flow model, and have a valuation of each of those synergies and dis-synergies. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Christophe and Michiel, for showing us a little bit more about how the synergies are incorporated and also how synergy targets are established within an organization. So moving on to the next question here. Are there any synergy quick wins that you can find on any integration? And Thomas, I'd love to have you chime in there.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, this is Thomas. And I would like to actually go very briefly through it. My understanding and experience has been that whenever you want to really search for quick wins, you look primarily for revenue synergies. They may not come to fruition kind of in a 3 or 6 months time frame post-closing, but they clearly identify where you can really quickly zero in on, and that will have a significant value contribution. Secondly, it's procurement. And if you look at procurement, it's not only number of suppliers, it's also terms and pricing that one should focus in on. Then thirdly, I would always look at something that I describe as business model synergies. And when I talk about business model synergies, I talk about we have different ways of approaching the market. And even so, two companies may be in the same industry and may have the same way to sell to their customers. One may, for example, if you take a telecom service company, one may focus more on contracts, the other one may focus more on prepaid mobile customers. And so there are differences in the business model, and if you zero on these, there are definitely quick wins to be captured. Fourth is facilities, something that typically is not looked at very quickly on, because you just leave people where they are, but this is definitely something where you can get synergies from and quickly also. And then we have the typical one that a lot of people jump on, but that I caution people to execute immediately, which is administrative staff, like in the finance, HR, IT, or corporate arena. Be careful with those quick wins, because you need to have a solid base for implementing the synergies. And last but not least, what's always very, very important to get quick wins to begin with is a very good expedited communication between both parties at the executive level. Really have that direct link structured well, and a good communication set up well. Thank you, Stefan.
All right, thank you very much, Thomas. This is a good introduction. And then finally, on pre-planning, some questions coming about. I understand what cost synergies are, but what are growth synergies? And Scott, maybe you can shed some light here.
Yeah, on the growth side, you might have revenue synergies tied to an increase in annual sales run rate that may be enabled by some cross-selling that you can do now. That would be an example of a revenue synergy that is helping stimulate growth. One of the things, though, on that, it sounds, I always see that, cross-selling, and it sounds easy, but underneath there are things like Salesforce consolidation, compensation plan, integration, and a lot of other things that enable people training and such that enable people to actually do the cross-selling. So the timing on when you realize things like that, if you back up from there's a lot of work that has to be done in advance to enable that. Thanks.
All right, very good, very good. So moving on, let's move on over to integration due diligence. So the first question we have here is, what do I do if we don't have the resources to deal with a detailed synergy analysis? Scott, why don't you try to take that one on?
Yeah, this is a lot of times I've seen this handled a couple ways. Sometimes folks will bring in an outside resource, an accounting firm like a Grant Thornton, for example, to help develop and manage the tracking and reporting and analysis of the synergy plan, because there is so much work involved in that. Otherwise, you need to make sure that you have some dedicated resources within finance that are dedicated, only to the tracking and reporting and variance analysis to the synergy plan. It's very hard to tack this on to IMO work and kind of saddle the IMO to try and manage this. You need dedicated resources and some expertise in this area for sure.
All right, great, Scott. Thank you very much for taking that question. Next question we have in the integration due diligence space is, are cost and growth synergies both essential to any deal? Christoph, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I wouldn't say that they are essential. It depends on your strategy. So if you agree upfront on your strategy, you can say that you do an acquisition, for example, for geographical expansion. So that's not, and that may cost you money. You may invest in geographical expansion and buy a company somewhere, because otherwise you would never get into that country. And there are no cost synergies there. Growth synergies may be, but the most important thing is geographical expansion. Now, what we see in reality is that these non-financial synergies often play an important role. Maybe 10-20% of acquisitions are because of those non-financial synergies. But that also means that 80% is of the deals are also driven by financial synergies, of course.
All right, very good. That's a good description of how things range. Our next one is a good one for Michiel, and it relates to ownership. Who within the business owns the realization of synergies? Michiel, what are your thoughts there?
Thanks, Stefan. I very much agree what Scott was saying just before, that it is so important that in every M&A transaction you have enough finance resources, secure those finance resources. As of the beginning, we always add a finance person to the M&A team, helping with the valuation and the financial modeling, and helping the workstream leaders with quantifying synergies and dis-synergies. This financial person should help those workstream leaders during the due diligence and really identifying and value those synergies. This finance person is heavily involved in the integration process, monitoring the realization of the synergies, because that's what it's all about. You have to realize those synergies to create value for the company. But after all, the finance person does not own. He's not the one who is accountable for realizing the synergy. I think that is the workstream leader. He's owning the identified synergy. But I think of course he needs some help from the finance guy, and it also requires a lot of training. It requires training over the company of all your workstream leaders. They are non-financials, but you help them, you have to train them, and that is what we are doing in our company, Monica Healthcare. That We have an intensive training program for those workstream leaders. We have a group of 20 to 25 people who we train in let's say the basic financials on M&A deal. So summarizing, it's the workstream leader owning and is accountable, but a lot of help from finance. Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like there needs to be a good common understanding with everybody involved regarding the role and then the responsibilities of each role. So, very insightful there. All right, so moving on, we'll skip over to a couple slides as we're running a little past our time, but on track now for the integration office planning. Uh, Communication plans get a lot of attention, but even so, what are some of the common mistakes companies make during planning? Scott, I think this is a great question for you. I know that this comes up a lot.
Sure, thanks, Stefan. Like I mentioned earlier, just not planning through at least day 90 and having your communications very much wither after day one is a common mistake. The other is inconsistent messaging. What I mean by that is that people kind of go off the reservation and start answering questions or sending out things that aren't exactly aligned with what others are doing. And as we all know, people compare notes on the other side and quickly figure out that it is inconsistent and that we're not all singing off the same playbook, and that causes you problems that you have to fix. The other one is just avoiding key questions. I'm a big fan of being transparent, and if you don't know the answer, it's okay. Tell people you don't know the answer. Are we going to eventually move corporate headquarters next year? We don't know yet. We're still evaluating that. Is a better answer than avoiding it. Because when you avoid it, as we all know, the information vacuum gets filled with what people think will happen, and then that becomes the topic of conversation. So, if you don't know the answer, it's fine to tell people that you don't know the answer. But those are probably the top three, I would say.
Very good, very good. It sounds like establishing trust and maintaining that trust is extremely important. It's
Yeah,
very good.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Next question we have, and this one's to Christoph. What should be considered when developing a robust framework and a methodology? Again, being consistent is important here. Christoph, what are your thoughts?
Well, I've noticed that lessons learned sessions, and somebody talked about that earlier. That's very well. It's a good practice, but those lessons may not always be available to other members in the organization because often the deal teams won't be the same. So what is handy is to have a common corporate handbook. It shouldn't be anything too elaborate, but some major ways that unites the company in the approach of a merger or of an acquisition. And I would have the same tools, the same language, the same terminology, ways of sharing your documents, having low threshold tools, only Word and Excel and PowerPoint. If you start using MS Project, for example, half of the team will drop off. And having a certain meeting rhythm, and that also helps when you start 90 days beforehand. So some very simple things, but if you don't do them, people will start developing their own stuff, and you will lose consistency even before the acquisition.
Yeah. Oh, very good. I think the idea of control and being able to establish a common process is extremely important. So good thoughts there. All right, so moving on from the integration office planning, we'll dive right in here to execution. And what can we do if we see that we're failing to realize planning synergies? In that one, Scott, I'll throw that back to you.
Sure. I guess one of the first things, if you immediately know you're off track, I think there are three things to check. One is your assumptions, and hopefully, you did this earlier, but if you're off, maybe you need to revisit some of the critical planning assumptions in the formulation of the synergies to begin with. Second is timing. Have you lost some timing which is affecting your synergy variance. Third is, sometimes synergy targets don't get broken down and distributed into work plans properly. And as a result, there may be some things that, I like to say nobody owns because it's not in their work plan and no one is specifically on the hook for a number. But those are probably the first three places to look. And then, after you've done that, if it was just wildly optimistic to begin with, then it's time to either reforecast it or come to the conclusion that it was and put a more realistic goal in place.
All right, very, very good, very good. So moving on, we've talked obviously a lot about synergies on our call as a main topic, and talking specifically about a template. So what is the scope of a synergy template, and maybe explain a little bit what a synergy template is. Thomas, can you take that on?
Sure, Stefan can take that on. Whenever I am involved in a synergy analysis and prioritization, I actually want my clients to look at it in a three-way part. We need a financial plan and financial calculation tab. That's one element. We need an executive summary. That's the second element. And then we need something that I call probability of success. And let me start with the executive summary because that's kind of where everything gets going. The executive summary should have a description. It should talk about the risks and hurdles, and I describe risks and hurdles, or the difference between risks and hurdles, in the following way. A hurdle is something that I can overcome. A risk is something that I seeingly enter into, and it's very important that when you then later on do a synergy prioritization and you go through with senior management and senior execs through those synergies that you have identified and calculated, that you clearly state hurdles and risks and that you tell these pieces apart. It obviously needs prerequisites, what has to happen so that this synergy can actually start. Needs a timing framework so that you understand how many months to actually starting the synergy, and then how many months does it take to implement the synergy. Who's responsible? It's very important so that you can go back to the person that takes responsibility from operations point of view. Like Michiel said earlier, it's clearly not the finance guy, it's someone in operations. Then define how the value creation happens over time on two levels. Typically one is earnings and the second one is cash flow. So take EBIT or whatever your prioritized way is, and then a cash flow calculation, whether it's EBITDA as an approximation, which is clearly not free cash flow, or take free cash flow. That would be the executive summary. On the financial plan, you obviously need to calculate out how specifically the synergy will be derived. Then call it back to the line items on your P&L or balance sheet that you will need to go back to for control, when you control whether and when you track your implementation process, so that you know exactly, okay, this line item on the P&L is actually targeted, or this line item on the balance sheet is tanged on. Then a comment section is important to understand who gave you the information and why did you calculate it the way you did. And then last but not least, the probability of success should be over 4 different time frames, like a 5 months period of time. Then you add 6 months to it to come up to a full year, for example. Then another 6 months and probably another 12 months, whatever the time horizon is going to be that most appropriately matches to your implementation tracking. And that's really what you want to do with the probability of success. You want to define the expected implementation timing on it. That would be it, Stefan.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for that methodical and thorough review of the template. Do appreciate that. Good. So moving on, you know, when activities start, people have their own agendas and priorities, and they basically scatter and start working. And so obviously we need to move against that a little bit, and especially related to synergies in focus. So and this goes to Christoph actually. What sense of urgency should be placed on synergies, given the urgencies that are placed on everything during an integration?
Well, I think the urgency should be placed on the fact that this is real. It's not something fancy and theoretical. And making things real for your management often means including it in the budget going forward. Because often people get measured on their budget, their KPIs and their bonus may depend on it. So by including it in the budget, it makes it real and it makes it urgent for those people. Now, including it in the budget after day one without having consulted your operational people is a big mistake, because then there's no ownership. So the urgency should start beforehand, during the due diligence, during the negotiations, and not just the deal team is then involved, but the deal team will talk to the operational guys and say, hey, is this realistic? What do you think? What's your opinion on a synergy or this synergy? And make it clear that whatever they say will become part of their budget going forward. So, so this is one way of looking at urgency. Another way of looking at urgency is just financially. Let's say that you've identified a run rate of 12 million per year in synergies, which is 1 million per month. Now, not doing anything will cost you 1 million. Each month that you delay things will cost you 1 million. And then people very often have a lot of other things on their mind, and they may not have time. But what you do then is bring in resources. And I would be surprised if they would cost you then 1 million if the synergies are 1 million. So the resources will be cheaper than what you will reap. So that's another way of looking at synergies.
All right, very good, very good. Good. And so moving on from execution. So now we've you know, completed the execution, and now we're in more of a wrap-up phase. So a few questions there before we wrap up for the day is, at what point should an integration be complete and turned over to operations and general project work? When does that transition occur? And Michiel, this one's for you.
Yes, thank you. At what point an integration should be complete is, of course, very different from transaction to transaction. The size, the deal size, and the deal scope. But talking to my experience, the integrations I've done, it took between 1 and 2 years, and I think 2 years is really the maximum. Very important is as well a very good handover to the line organization. You should really take time for that. It's quite crucial, and we have some war stories about that as well. What we normally do after the integration phase, we organize that lessons learned session. What went well, what could be improved. It's very important to document this, that future M&A project groups can learn from it and can use that for our next integration. I would say accumulated M&A knowledge is very crucial for a company. You learn from every deal. When do you consider an integration to be closed? That's really when you have when all the general milestones are completed, and you have your integration checklist completed, and so the workstream charters and milestones and deliverables that are in there should be ticked off. And if the major part is ticked off, at some point you have to decide to close the integration and hand it over to the line organization. Of course, maybe I can give some examples for completion. What should be complete is the order to cash process should be transferred, the IT solutions should be aligned, sales forces have to be integrated. Of course, the employees have to be taken over or have to be dismissed or transferred. So, but it very much depends, summarizing from transaction to transactions. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, very good. So in other words, what you're saying is, each company is different. There's some rule of thumbs from a general standpoint, but at the same time, programmatically, by the plan, it should be checked off and driven that direction. So that makes good sense. And our final question for today, Christoph, you're the lucky person to receive the last question. And this also goes specifically to knowledge transfer. What are some things to watch out for in knowledge transfer in moving after the close of the initiative?
Well, I heard Ms. Michiel talk about the advantage of doing a lot of acquisitions. One pitfall in knowledge transfer is that lessons that you learn in one case will not always and not necessarily apply in the next case. And you see there's some studies on this, that like in a third of the cases, companies with a very successful acquisition often have a dip in their next one, because transferring the acquisition routines from one acquisition to the next is like applying old lessons to a new setting. And you see that those companies that have a dip in subsequent acquisitions then rise up again, because after a while their team and their management have a certain heterogeneity and have an accumulated acquisition experience, and then so eventually they get there. So if you can also choose and opt to avoid the dip and make sure that you don't fall into that pitfall.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Christoph. And avoiding the dip, I can take. I think that that's a great way to end it, and make sure that obviously through all the comments that we provided here through our experience, it gives some good insight to how you all out there can help with your post-merger integration. So appreciate all the time everybody has spent in listening to our conversation. I see that hardly anybody dropped off of the call, so appreciate that, and hope you got a lot of value. Additionally, one of the things we're sensitive of, since it was a large call, we weren't able to take questions real time. So if you'd like to contact us, feel free to go to gpmip.com/contact and send us questions. We've got our entire team here that can reach out to you and help you with some guidance in your specific areas.